Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live coding session. For those who haven't been to these before, we try and do these about once a month. It will be a live stream session with some guests. We're going to be doing some live coding here. We're going to be talking about implementing advanced Algolia features. So for those who don't know me, my name is Chuck Meyer. I am a Senior Developer Relations Engineer here at Algolia. So I'll be your MC host for today. I'm joined today by two engineers from our demo engineering team, Matthew Foyle and Hugo Valla, who will be hopefully joining us here in just a little bit. So our demo engineering team is responsible for building a lot of the amazing demos that you all have seen of Algolia, a lot of demos used by our sales team. I'll let them tell you a little bit more about the team, kind of what they do, but just the short version is that these are folks that know a lot of the ins and outs of Algolia and sort of layering in a lot of different content. So we're going to let them sort of spread their expertise today. If you don't know Algolia, we provide a set of hosted APIs for developers like yourselves to build out search and recommendation experiences in your applications, whether they're web applications or mobile applications. So that's kind of what we bring to the table and what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to be kicking it over to Matthew here in just a second. Matthew, why don't you tell us a little bit about the demo engineering team before we start doing some live demos?
Let's go. Nice to meet you, everyone. I presume you can hear me okay, and I trust Chuck to keep me honest and correct if you cannot. I'm Matt. Like I said, nice to meet you. I'm speaking to you normally from London. At the moment, I'm in the beautiful Poland. I lead the team of demo engineering at Algolia. And just in case you didn't know, or in case you want to work with us or do something or build something, we work closely with customers of Algolia, but not just people who are interested in improving search and discovery across the board. So if it's design or implementation or debouncing, all of those kind of close topics, there are different ways to do it. There are different ways to build it. And so we help within Algolia and outside Algolia to test out those things. We also work on doing the latest Algolia features and looking at them in different ways. So that's what we hope to share with you today. One of the ways that we built the ability to do that, configure it, and if you need access to it, you can feel free to access and we can walk through it together, no problem. That thing, thanks to Chuck and his speedy delivery of slides, is called a boilerplate. And so it's something we built internally. It's not available to the public yet, so you're one of the few who gets to see this in practice. It has two goals. It's a way for us to try and create fast and configurable search experiences over and over again, and also a way to implement new things in the best way possible. So it's a fully functional app with most of the Algolia stuff in there, which you'll get to see and use with me today. Okay, if we skip over, you're going to learn three things. These are the things that you will, in technical terms, walk away with. I can't guarantee you will be up for a walk after this, but even if you switch tabs, this is all you'll get once you switch over back to Hacker News. You will have Algolia's power in your hands because it is the platform that we're going to be using today for the search and discovery stuff. You're going to see how to quickly set up a search and discovery experience based on how we did it. And you're going to learn how to do some of the more, we could say advanced, but some, I suppose, more complicated is not the word, more powerful isn't the word.
Mature, maybe?
All powerful.
How about mature?
Thank you, Chuck. Some of the more mature and deeper integrated, shall we say, features.
That's
so
awesome.
Some of the things which aren't necessarily there out of the box, but are up to you, the engineer, to do. So, you know, the flexibility is in your hands. It's like we're putting is the millionaire, Chris? Chuck, excuse me, how do we call Thor's hammer these days?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I think that's it, no?
Yeah, Mjolnir, yeah.
So we have that one. There's some lightning coming down and we need to figure out what to do with it, fry ourselves or point it in the direction of something useful. And we'll do that today, be useful.
Hey, and Matthew, this is there's a bit of business I forgot to cover up front, which is we are using Zoom for today's live stream for the live coding session. And the cool thing about Zoom is it has a chat, and I see there's a lot of folks chatting in there, and I can't wait to jump in and read some of that. But Zoom also has a dedicated Q&A feature. And so you'll see right next to the chat, there's actually a Q&A button. So as Matt and hopefully Hugo are sort of doing their live coding today, if you have any questions or if there's anything, outside of that you want to ask us about as well, I encourage you to put it in the Q&A section. It's just going to make it easier for us to track, and we'll do we'll reserve some time for Q&A at the end.
Perfect. Thank you, Chuck.
Great.
So with that said, we don't want to keep you too long in that section because this is us talking at you rather than teaching and you responding. And on Chuck's point, it would be really nice if you responded. Bear in mind that what Chuck and I see is basically our slides and each other. And we're well aware that there's a wonderful group of people here, and it's really nice to interact with you. So at any stage, please do use the Q&A, which Chuck mentioned. Nice one. Okay, so what we're going to do is share my screen for now, and I'm going to share my entire desktop to you. That is quite the privilege. I'm going to double check what we have on here. Everything is good. And we're going to be looking through 3 windows. Okay, give me 1 second. There we go. So the first that you will see is the slides right here. And Chuck will tell me if any of this isn't working as we intend. You'll see the Algolia dashboard right here. If any of you are not familiar with this dashboard, you will be by the time this is finished. It's the front end way of configuring the GUI, shall we say, of Algolia. So everything that you need to set up, manage, configure, you can do it from in here. We'll also be using the documentation. It's really good. It's really, really nice, as you would expect from a search and discovery company. And then we'll be jumping into the code itself of the boilerplate. So we'll be going through this kind of piece by piece. Some pieces we won't pick out, others we will. We'll be working today in React. Okay, so if you're not familiar with that, we'll do our best to explain it in a way which should be familiar in some way. And if you are, well done. This is going to be this is going to be like duck in water for you. So let's start by looking at the boilerplate itself. Now, when you want to get Algolia up and running, you need to do a couple of things. You need to have a code base which implements something like Algolia Instant Search. Now, Instant Search lives in the Building Search UI section right here. And here we have different flavors. Now, we're using React Instant Search today, which doesn't use React hooks, but you can also, thanks to the new version, implement directly the hooks. And we're doing the same. We hope to release it, I think, next week. But if you go to React Instant Search, you can see that it's partly a UI library right here. And you can install that UI library in order to help you. And so if you look here, we can install it and we can use it. So it requires a couple of things, the app ID and an API key. And then we have our components. We wrap everything in an instant search component, provide it with an API client and a default index name. That's a place to get your content from. Then we can start using the instant search widgets like search box, like hits, which are search results. So already you can see that just by using this, we've already scaffolded a huge amount of search and discovery. Now, if you do this yourself, you'll see that the design is not necessarily as you want it, but it's a good way of seeing how things work. So that's the first thing to do. But on top of that, we built our own application. So our own code base. And I'm just going to show you how that works now. The app is running. It's running right here on localhost 3001. It built incredibly quickly. I don't know if you noticed that, but just as an aside, we'll teach you some of the tools that we're using along the way in case you want to explore them. It built so quickly because we're using Vite or Vite, or however you'd like to pronounce that. And it's incredibly fast with hot reloading and everything else that you would expect. It's pretty good for React. So I'll leave that there for you to look at, but it's super cool. We won't get into battle of the frameworks. As I'm sure Chuck has his own opinions, as do I, but this is what we chose to use and we really like it if you're interested. What do you think, Chuck?
Oh, I'll keep my opinions to myself. But I do have to say that, I've just been really, really digging playing with React hooks and sort of kind of playing in that space lately. And I'll leave it at that.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay, so here's our application. We're going to run through it step by step. So we need to always configure our environment, and we do that here. Forgive, I have some type errors over there. So we have our search client, which includes an API key and an app ID. We need that every time. We can get it from the Algolia dashboard. Here we see a main index name, and this is powered by an atom. And an atom is our way of managing state. It's done using Recoil. Recoil is a state manager, somewhat akin. They might be insulted by me saying this to Redux or another Storm state manager. Again, it's what we chose to use and we really enjoy it. If you want to look into it, please do. And there are a bundle of others, of course. So please do compare it to your own and let us know what you think. But we find it really fast and easy to use. Okay, we then use a couple of other things. So we initialize an insights client if we want to send events and feedback to Algolia, saying, okay, hey, look, I configured this, someone clicked this, someone made a search. We need to tell Algolia that because that feeds the engine. You'll see how that works in a minute. And then we have our index names where we can get them. So we have suggestions, we have articles, we've injected content. Those will become important in a minute. Now, the other thing that we do is that we very often have different data sets that we use. And here in hits config, what we're doing is defining a map. We define a map of the attributes in our data set. So here on the left, these are used in the app itself in this. And on the right, this is the name of the attribute actually indexed in Algolia. Now that's really powerful for us and perhaps for you, because if one of your attributes changes inside Algolia when you're importing it, you don't need to go the whole way through your app and update everything. You just need to pop over here and update it there. So it's very good if something ends up becoming nested, for example. You know how data structures sometimes change and evolve over time. This is very handy. And you can see we have nested here, so dot notation indicating level 0. And we will see how we access that in a moment because it's not actually that easy when you're doing it this way. So we'll come back to that. Now you can see that we have an enormous amount of configuration over here. That's because we have tried to break up every Algolia feature and make it completely configurable. So we can look through a few of these, whatever is most useful to you. Now, when we've done this, we just want to make sure that we indeed have our attributes, have our data inside Algolia, and have our configuration set up. So we've done all that already. If you haven't, you can find it all in the documentation, but it's very simple. Now we're going to take you through a couple of things here, a couple of features which you might like to set up yourself. All of this app, as you see it, is Algolia. That's very important because we always focus, don't we, on like search and discovery. The first word is search, isn't it, Chuck? So we tend to go straight to the search bar and say, well, how does that work? Is that working well? But in fact, when you think about it, when you're visiting a site or an app, you will go into discovery mode just as often. And perhaps you will end up at the search bar if you're looking already for something specific. But we do find ourselves browsing, let's be honest, if we're in between meetings or anything else, we could just be looking around. And so it's very important for that looking around to be very efficient. And we'll show you how that works. Now here at the top, we have a navigation. That's all Algolia. This is one-to-one personalization. Again, Algolia, sensing a trend, so I'm going to shut up about the last part. This is segmentation. So if you have groups of users, how do you tell your application to respond differently to those? We'll get into that. This is a banner. You can indeed inject banners in different places in different ways using Algolia. Sorry, it had to be said. But we'll see how to do that in a minute because it's not something that you normally associate with my search engine. So you can do that, but in a way that is very flexible for you, the developer. And here we have some carousels. So they're very barely minimally styled. It's just to illustrate the point. The styling is yours to control. The functionality is something we're here to describe to you. Now, how do these carousels work? That's the first thing we're going to get into here today. So we indeed have, guess what? Some configuration for this. Now, the way that we've implemented it is something you could do as well, but there are other ways, which I'll explain. So we have two carousels. Now we implement them here using carousel config. If we see where that is actually applied, you'll see that we have home carousel, right here. So we map over our carousel config. And for each one, we're returning home carousel. And this is just some lazy loading, by the way, if you're wondering what that is. If you haven't seen it before, if you know a better way, put it in the chat or the Q&A. But we're using suspense and lazy from React, and our own loader component is a fallback. So when this carousel is loading in, it's going to show the loader. As soon as it's loaded, okay, voila. And this home carousel is over here. Apologies, by the way, for the wonderful red lines you see there. That is not normal. There are no errors here. But since we're in a live demo, I guess it wouldn't be a live demo without having some errors. Luckily, they don't affect anything. So what happens for each carousel? Well, as you can see, we had this configuration over here. Let me pop back to it first. Okay. Now for each one, we pass in a context and a title. And down below, we have a hits per carousel. So what on earth is happening there? Well, in home carousel, there's a component called index with an index ID and an index name. There's a configure, and then there's a custom hits carousel, which takes the title. So for each one, an index is a way of forcing the app to make a separate search request. It can be to the same index as your normal content, or it can be to a different index. So this is a good way of making it compatible with things like, what if you want a carousel for your influencers? Say you're in that industry and that lives in a different index to your products. If you have an index for articles, or if you want to blend the two, well, index is a reasonably good use for that. Configure is a simple way of giving in different configurations, as you might have guessed, in for Algolia to work on. So you see this important one, the hits per carousel, which we took in before, that's called hits per page. That's a default prop for configure. And that just tells us, okay, for each carousel, we're going to return only 8 products. We're doing this globally to all the carousels. As you saw, it's one configuration. No reason you couldn't pop it in each one. Here we have context. Again, very important. So context came from our carousel config, and it was defined by us. Now, what is that config doing? If we have a look at our rules, you will see, if we search perhaps for carousel, that we have a rule. And in this one, we've made these rules very simplistic. We have a rule which says, with an empty search, so i.e. on the homepage, with context, homepage carousel 1, please do this, boost bags. Now that's very simplistic. We could add to that and we could say, well, not only do I want to boost bags, but I want to actually pin this bag to the top, and I want to hide that bag, or I want to change this entirely and apply a filter, that kind of thing. So this is yours to control. As a merchandiser, you can give whoever you want power to change and adapt this. But isn't this powerful? This context could be anything. It could come from anywhere. So it's a simple string, and it's just a way of saying, hey, when this is triggered, show these products. So you could use it on your carousel, but you can use it in other places too. It's very compatible. That, in essence, is how we're controlling the carousels here. So we have 2 rules. When we review and publish, those will be put into production. We can always, I won't save our changes here. We can always do things like try and test them, because we could do custom search parameters over here and passing context. We can do it here as well. We could just say homepage carousel 1, and voila, in our dashboard right here, we will see those results, and we'll be able to check the ranking of them and all kinds of things. Okay. Now remember, with rules, you just need to create it in the visual editor. So just like this, new rule, visual editor, off you go. Okay, and then you can see that kind of thing. We have a query condition, and there is context. So now you know what that does. I'm sure you can think of different ways to apply this, by the way, not just the carousels, and you will also see that in action in a moment. So in this way, you can pop open carousels all over the place, not a problem. All right. So we have indeed one feature already done. I'm going to do a time check for us. And I'll just show you how we're doing a few other things when it comes to this. So we have context used not just in the carousels, but also in the navigation. I'll tell you why that is, right? So for that, I need to describe how the navigation works. Once again, we're going to pop back over to our configuration. And we have some category configuration here. We have this category page filter attribute. So this is what is going to be filtered on when we generate our category pages. Okay, you'll see this in a second, because if we click men's, it's going to be filtering on this attribute in the data. You'll see why that's important in just a moment. Here we have our links. Again, it's an atom. Now the value for our links, we've just hard-coded it here. Again, yours could be completely dynamic. But you can see that for men's, we have a type of filter, a name, an actual filter attribute, which is men's, and then a URL. Now what's actually going to happen is that for these parts of the navigation, if we hit men's, it is going to apply that filter on category attribute, and then it's going to filter for us. Same with women's. So it's very straightforward. This is a neat design tip. Let us know what you think about it. I think it's actually very helpful. Very often I might be on a page. The visual indication I'm on a category page might not be so strong. We don't have breadcrumbs in here, for example. So it's good to let people know, hey, if you make a search, you're actually searching in this page. Otherwise, you might not find what you're looking for at all. And even easier, because you know, sometimes there are nested navigations, things like this. If you remove that, you can go back to the default results page, easy peasy. So if you decide, okay, I didn't find what I was looking for, I want to expand my search, off you go. Now there's a reason I'm showing you that. So you just learned one way of setting up some kinds of links and navigation, that's using filters. The second way, you'll see that the type of this one down here is context. Now think about it for a second. When you have these links and it's a filter, well, how would you merchandise those? How would you dictate what's going to be shown on each of the pages? Well, indeed, you could go here. You could create a good old-fashioned rule, and you could say, when the filter women's is applied, I wish to merchandise this page, do whatever I want with it. Okay, that's not a problem. But you're based on these category pages. What if you want to create a collection that has never existed before? What if it's not based on your existing data? Well, that's where context can come in handy. So you can say your query condition, something like summer collection. And based on this one, just like this, we have the ability to choose exactly what products we want, or using these criteria, choose exactly how to configure and work this page. And this collection of products never existed before. If you delete it, it won't exist again. So it's a really, really flexible way of putting different kinds of products together into different ways of offering things to your customer. So that's extremely helpful. Okay. That is the other way of doing context. And I'm just going to show you how it's implemented over here. So we have, with me one second, our header. Things live in our header. And we have our header laptop, and we have navigation. Again, I'm really sorry for these lines. It's our fantastic ESLint, which we just upgraded, and we don't use import React, even though we have JSX. It does work. We don't need it, obviously, but it's not happy with us. So apologies, I should have spotted that before. I don't know why it's happening now. But there you go. So we just map over our links, and then we can set our query state. There's a bit of logic in here, by the way. So we can navigate to search, and then we set some state. We set the type, which again was filter or context, and the action. this case, it's context. I'm sure you'll see much more elegant ways of writing this. This is meant to be verbose for these purposes, and also the fact that I wrote it this way. So I'm sure we'll get to write it better in future. There you go. So with that said, I'm just going to show you a couple of other ways of getting around this. And I do believe that my wonderful colleague Hugo is now with us. So I'm going to move on to the next feature in a moment, which is personalization. And then Hugo can introduce himself and take over and teach us about things like segmentation and things like, we have these wonderful parts of the demo, like the guide, and we have the ability, I'm not going to spoil Hugo's show here, to inject content, which is super cool. So just a teaser of what's to come. That's incredibly interesting. And again, if you go through your personas, you're going to be able to personalize this along with your segments as well. Hugo's going to teach us how to build that. But before we do that, we're going to look at personalization setup, because for everything else that we just described, we were using ad hoc rules, weren't we? Just popping in, creating one here, creating one there. There's lots of tools to manage these rules in dashboards, so it's very easy to do. But we're about to discover a feature of Algolia that's more driven by an engine without you setting it up every time, and that is personalization. So it works in a couple of ways. You remember earlier we said we installed something called Insights in order to give Algolia feedback about what's happening. So I'll see if I can trigger an example here. Maybe it's not on this branch. So if someone added one of these to their cart, for example, or if someone was on the results page and said, well, I want to look at this one a bit deeper, then all of these actions should trigger Algolia to say, well, hey, this person, we say person in quotes, right, sent an add to cart for this product or search results. Now, what can we do with that information? Well, every time a user, in quotes, does something like that, we can build an impression of them. What are they like? And again, we're saying this person in a very abstract sense, aren't we? Because at this stage, it's just a device. Now, how do we indicate that device while being GDPR compliant and everything else? We use what's called a user token. And that user token is a string. You can send it to Algolia when you're implementing personalization, which Hugo's going to show you in a moment. And for every event associated with that user token, we will build up what's called a profile. So you don't need to do anything once this is set up. Here we have Stephen James. Again, this would absolutely not be Stephen James. It's just so we have a visual representation. It would be more like #123 or some kind of GUID. You get the picture. You can see on the right there, we have some actual generated ones for you, but those are not predictable. So this is the one we did for this. And we can see that Stephen James has been quite active. You might guess that we've had some involvement there. We haven't locked Stephen James in a room and asked him to pretend to buy a bunch of stuff for 90 days. We've sent these events manually ourselves, but normally they come from the front end. Now, if you're sending events and you're unsure, are they reaching? Are they good? In data sources, you can pop over here and check the events received, check the debugger to see are there any new events, check what's going on there. And here we see, so we've got Stephen James, that's his user token. And here are some of the things that he's been doing. He's been looking at sports shoes in the gender men. He's done a click event. So all this is obviously detailed in a documentation, but it's just to give you an idea. Now, Stephen James has been doing quite a lot. And so once we get his events, we can apply a strategy against them. And that strategy, which we won't go into too deeply now, is going to dictate how the results should change for this device as opposed to an anonymous device. But we can test it out by looking at what happens when Stephen James, per se, visits the website. We can see that he has an affinity to men's, and sorry, probably should say more specifically, should we say an affinity to men's shoes and indeed the gender of men's clothing, shoes, accessories, and everything else. He's got a very high affinity to that. So with each event, this profile can change and adapt. You don't need to manage it, which is very powerful. Now, if we move over to the simulator, you'll see that the results do change. Now, we need to implement this in the app very specifically. So I need to hand over to Hugo in order to help us do that. And Hugo, if you would like to introduce yourself, and I will stop screen sharing as soon as you say.
Of course. First of all, sorry guys for being late. I had some connection problem. It happens to everyone. So I'm working with Matt on the demo engineering team, and I'm building demo for Algolia since almost 1.5 years now. So I'm just gonna share my screen to show you how we can implement the personalization. So if everyone can see my screen, is it okay?
Looks great.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Maybe a little bigger on the font, but looks great.
Okay, I can try to do that. Better?
That's good for my old eyes. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So first of all, I think Matt already showed you that we have a config folder with everything inside. So I'm just gonna show you the persona config file. So when you get there, you will see that you get a persona config array, and inside that you will see that you have a value, a label, and a description. This is allowing us to just get back our value for the user token that Matt talked about earlier. And the label is here for the front end, and the description is here as well for the front end. So right now we need just a selector to select our persona in the front end. So we are using a library called React Select, which is really well known and really useful. So right now we just getting back our config from the config file that I just showed you before, and we are selecting the persona, and we are setting the persona to an atom for putting in the global state to be able to using it in all across the app. So in the front end, it's really easy. When you're selecting a persona, for example, Steven, you will see that the front end is changing because in the dashboard, we already set up and we sent some events about Steven, and we say that he is a man that likes sports shoes. And we are able to do that in the code because in our search result page components, we have this widget that is called configure, and it's very powerful because out of the box with Algolia, we can send a bunch of props to Algolia, and we can send this one, enable personalization. So if set to true, you will enable the personalization, of course, and you will be able to use the user token. And we are passing the user token, which is the value of the user token, to Algolia, and then we can adapt the front end and reflect what's happening in the dashboard that way. So I think that is it for the personalization. Now I would like to show you something that is quite similar. We call it segmentation. So personalization is individual. Every user that you have will have independent characteristic, but sometimes you want to target some users that are very similar. For example, you want to target all female, you want to target all male, you want to target the user that is on your website for the first time, you want to target your VIPs or anything else. So you wish to treat those groups very similarly by adapting what they see on the front end. And as I said, Algolia is allowing you to do some personalization, but for the segmentation, you will need some segmentation system, and there is many out there, such as Dynamic Yield, for example. And that way, you will be able to create segments, to create groups, and by pulling the API of those platforms, you will be able to create a segment and use it inside Algolia. So our job here is just as a search engine is to get back those segments and try to change the results of Algolia according to those segments. So for that, we have something very useful that is called a segment filter, optional filter, sorry. And these parameters that I'm going to show you in just in a moment is able to boost a category, to boost results, given the criteria that you give to that particular segment. So if in the code, if I want to show you that, you will see, yeah, right there. So same as the configuration, the personalization, you get the segmentation, you get the config. So as you can see, there is this array which contain objects, and we have those values. And I just created two segments here. There is one about women and one about men. And same as the personalization, you will be able to create just a select and set the selected value of your segments through an atom to be able to have it in all the app. And then on the search result page component, you will be able to use these optional filters that I just talked about. So if we are giving the segment optional filters that we just choose in the dropdown, you will see that it's also reflect on the front end. So it's nothing to do with the dashboard that Matthew showed you before. It's something that that you create yourself. So, and to illustrate how it works, I'm just going to change, sorry for that. I'm just going to change, for example, the segment women. Let's say we want to be a little bit more precise. So for example, we want to target women, and we want to target women who like shoes. Not very original, but it's a segment. So on the front end right now, I'm just going to change also the label, image shoes segment, let's say that. So right now, if I'm just refreshing my app, I'm going to get the segment, of course, because it's just front end. But right now, because I choose a certain category, which is female shoes, women's shoes, you will see that on the front end, it's also applied directly. I think that's it for the segment. Do I have the time to talk about the injected content? I think so. I will take 5 minutes. Okay, yeah, cool.
Go for it.
Perfect, guys. Thanks. So the injected content, as Matt already teased you, is very, very helpful for a lot of use cases. For example, if you want to display any promotional or editorial content based on search query, on facets, or any refinements that you have on your website. If you want, for example, I don't know, insert a banner on your website that is promoted by a query as well, or something else, or if you want to show some customized suggestion based on a user profile or anything else really. So how does that work? So we have something out of the box with Algolia that is called injected it, and you just have to provide it component in which all your hits are gonna lies. And then you just have to, there is two ways to make it work. You can make it work with rules. So in the dashboard, you're creating some rules, and Algolia is sending back the rules, all the information about the rules, and you will just in the front end get back those elements and put that in the front end. But you can also create another index, which is getting right there. And if you're typing a query, for example, that is in this other index that you created, Algolia is going to search into that other index and put your injected content right away in the front end among all the results that you already have about your products or anything. So how does it reflect on the front end? So if I'm just getting back to my default search result page, if I'm typing, for example, Nike, you will see that right there we have promotional products, promotional hits that is appeared among the results. It's also working, that was triggered by a rule, by the way, but it's also working with an index, as I said. So for example, if I index shoe, you will get some an advertisement about shoe, about Stephen Curry. So these results come from another index that we created in Algolia index, and basically Algolia is going to search among those two indexes. And if you say, I want my result from index 2 appears in the 3rd position, you will get your advertisement appears in the 3rd position. So it's really powerful. It's also working with banner. So it's really powerful, and you can use it in a lot of use cases if you are e-commerce website, but also if you are a media website and you want to promote some editorial content. Yeah, it's really endless. I think that was all I wanted to show you about the injected content. I'm sure you have plenty of questions for us right now. So I'm just gonna let Chuck end this meeting.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Hugo. And thank you, Matthew, for all that you showed. I know this was a ton of content. We showed a lot of different things. So I know folks are still processing. There are not a lot of questions in the Q&A section. There was sort of an interesting sort of point that came up in chat, asking a little bit about server-side rendering, right? Some of these things, obviously for the interactive search, we really do encourage putting that on the client side. It's going to reduce latency. It's going to give a better user experience. But for some of these things like carousels and some of the other things, would it be possible to sort of pre-render these on the back end using some of the SDKs?
Hey. Yes, I feel like walking through a minefield right now. There are many considerations and no one right answer. Let's put that off the path. Yeah, there are many ways in which it's compatible, that being one of them. Indeed. And yeah, obviously the only consideration, I suppose, is like in general and with caching and with everything else and with pre-building is how you've all these things going on, like personalization, segmentation, everything is changing in real time. The AI engine is running. And so for us, it's always a trade-off when we think about these kind of concepts about how dynamic, real time and adaptable do we want the app to be versus how efficient and how much can we pre-bundle, pre-build and reuse in that kind of way. But that's just a general premise. It doesn't answer the question directly. Yeah. It's just a balance of those two. I should add, Chuck, by the way, if there aren't too many questions in the chat, I could give us one more feature as a little takeaway if you'd like to do that, or we can feel free to discuss different topics.
Well, that's cool. I've got a couple of questions myself, and then we'll see if there's other folks that are sort of answering or asking questions in the chat or in the Q&A section, which is where we prefer them. If we don't get a lot of questions there, then we can end on a bonus feature. I think that'd be awesome. But I do love your response there, Matthew. I will say that I was at the Remix conference last week, and Sarah Dayon, who's one of our staff engineers, gave a great presentation about that initial render and sort of speeding up that initial render for folks that might be on a slow connection or sitting in a subway station or at a conference, by using some sort of back-end rendering to sort of do that initial before the user is interacting with the site or typing anything to get it kind of up and running, and then sort of handing off and hydrating to the front end for the actual search and the further interactions. So to your point, there's a lot of different patterns for that. And I think particularly with some of the new React rendering and some of the kind of the new features that are coming about, there's going to be a lot of answers to that question. I'd love to see what people do there. I had a question about your pile of config files, because I think one interesting point here is this is a very mature, right? You all know a lot about Algolia features, but you're also sort of building to a particular audience, which is sales engineers, folks that, want to build out demos, highlight different features. There's a lot of config there, and I know people have a lot of opinions about when to use config versus where to put things in code. I was particularly interested, Hugo, on yours, when you were showing that persona config file. That feels like something that would probably be like an API or a backend database if this was a real site, right? To pull out those user tokens. Would you agree with that? And do you have any other comments about levels of configuration, or is that again kind of one of these like not one right answer?
About the personalization, I think you're totally right, but Algolia is giving us the features to pull the user token that correspond to events that is sending through the app, and then adapt the front end according to that, which is great. And about the configuration file, to be honest, we think a lot. Think a lot about how to implement everything, because we have a lot of widgets, a lot of features into that boilerplate. And we thought that it was great to just have everything in one place. And if you want to adapt, I don't know, the boilerplate for a prospect or for anyone, you go through those config file and you will have a perfectly working demo in I don't know, changing 10 files, but it's not changing the whole app, and you don't have to build the whole app again. So yeah, it was a trade-off kind of.
An extra comment there, if it's helpful, to echo what Hugo said, is that for anyone who's looking to do like a gold standard site, there's a lot of A/B testing that goes on, isn't there? And a lot of introducing new features and checking new features. Now, a big part of our configuration is choosing whether or not to display and enable parts of the features, everything from voice search to federated search to different ways of showing different things. And so it's possible we bundled that in that way for our own efficiency, but if you had an overlay which helped you manage that, I'm sure there are services to help you manage like A/B test, putting on voice search or not, and how does it react with federated search versus not. It's such an important topic, isn't it, of like how much content do you display when the user first clicks in the search bar? Do you display any, or do you wait for them to search? So that's the other thing which we didn't do ourselves, but another service could help you with, and that's extra configuration abstracted away.
Yeah, I have to say, so I've used we have the Algolia PWA e-commerce template too, which is very sort of configuration based, and I think it's really nice to kind of help guide someone and maybe get you to some features that you wouldn't typically have thought to put in, or maybe you thought maybe it was more complicated than it was. I love having it sort of as a guide and having some rails on it. So I'm just curious to kind of see how you got there. It makes sense. Cool. And let's see, I see we've got, Chris was asking a little bit about ingestion from S3. Chris, we'll get to you at a later date on that one. That's a little further afield from where we are right now, but I love talking about data ingestion. We can certainly sort of reach out and talk about that. And let's see. And then there was a lot of questions about whether this was recorded. Yes, it was recorded. Hopefully, if you're not watching this live with us right now, you're watching it on YouTube, and we're waving to you too. And we will send the link out to everyone who registered for the webinar. And I'm going to ask the question that no one has asked, but someone is thinking, which is the code that you're showing, is it available? Can folks get to this code? Will folks be able to get to this code?
No. Not yet. It's obviously for our purposes, but we're working on helping everyone use it and everyone add to it. And so you can expect it at some point in the future.
Yep.
The PWA template, however, I do believe that is available, is it
That
not?
is, yes.
So if you look for, now that's more polished, that's more, 100% Lighthouse scores across the board, all of that, and all of those teams are all working on it. So it's incredible. If you ever want to take a look at that, that's what I would recommend in the meantime.
Yeah, it really follows a lot of the same sort of thought process of exposing things via configuration, being opinionated about what makes a good search and discovery experience. So not exactly similar to this. Plus, it's good to kind of see a different implementation. Folks have different opinions of how to build it on the front end. I don't think that uses the store that you're using, I don't believe, for state or some of the other features that you have. So it's kind of cool to see these sort of different stacks too. I think we've got 7 minutes left. Do you all want to take us through one more feature as kind of a bonus?
Love to.
Okay. I will say one other piece of business for those of you that are in the UK or in Europe. We are doing sort of a developer open house at the Algolia office on June 29th. So if you are in Europe or particularly near Paris, which is where this will be happening, we'd love to have you there. So, okay, go ahead, take it away.
Super. Okay, in 5 minutes or less, it'll be less. I can guarantee you that because we're running a good time schedule with each other. We have something which is called facet ordering. And so we didn't really touch on the search results page too much. And we didn't touch on that beautiful federated search, by the way. We'll come back to those in a later session. But you indeed have these facets on the left here. Now, we noticed that when we change these category pages and we do different searches, well, these facets generally stay the same, by which we mean like the order of the actual facets themselves. That's not standard behavior. That's something which you should change, and indeed you can. So I encourage you to look at React Instant Search at the facet display section, and in your configuration of your Algolia dashboard, if you are on, I do believe, the correct, by which I mean new plan, you have facet display. And you can create rules around facet display. So things like, I think we have one for sandals. We can order our facets. So just like this. So we can do it for pages. We can do it for multiple pages, many different patterns there, just to show you the premise, of course. We'll do size filter first. And then even within that, we can pin certain values to the top. We can rearrange them. We can do various different things with that. Again, we can display only the pinned values or all of them. We can do alphabetical order or the number of results for each one. So we've just done here just to illustrate the purpose. And again, using rules, so you can import the default order of your facets, and then you can just change them around. So like color, put it at the bottom. We apply that rule. This is incredibly quick. So if we publish that right now, it's saved. That's it. It's live. You could have put it in draft or something else, but that's incredible to get something into production. Now in the back end, we have, or rather in the front end, I should say, in this case, we have our instant search widget, which we've not needed to adapt that much, which can automatically detect this and handle it. So we can trigger it here in our guide just by popping over to the search term for sandals. We can see that size has popped up to the top. Our pin values are there. And indeed, we have gender there. So for this to work, you can see that category isn't shown, gender is, and color isn't. I would just need to pop back over and make sure category and color are in the facets, which are declared in the data, just to say, hey, okay, these are actual facets, you can use them. So the nice thing is, if you made a mistake here, it doesn't break your site. You have a rule or something else, did it a little bit wrong, it's still going to run smoothly, and I just need to go back into my configuration for the data and double check the facets that I have indeed declared over here and over here, and then it should be no problem. I also just need to pop back over to our facets, which I should be able to show you over here somewhere, right here. And we have indeed our refinement list. And so we can use that, and we can just wrap it in the instant search widget to use dynamically the facets which are declared in facet ordering. So that's a little bonus there. Sorry for not doing that before. It's just a nice way to end.
I'm back. Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you, Hugo, for everything that you've kind of shown today. Again, this has been recorded, so it will be up on YouTube. We try and do these live coding sessions about once a month. So you should see an invite coming up for late June, early July soon. You can look for it on our website. There was some talk in the chat about our Dev Hub. So the Algolia Dev Hub is kind of where everything comes together. You can find examples through our code exchange. You can find events like this. All sorts of kind of good resources though. So I encourage sending you to our Dev Hub and to our code exchange. Again, thank you to Matthew Foyle and Hugo Valla. Great demos today, really appreciate it. Hopefully it's given you some thoughts about what to do. Again, my name's Chuck Meyer. If you want to reach out to me, I'm around on Twitter at Chuck M, and I'm also available through email if you're feeling old school, chuckmeyer@algolia.com. So thank you all, take care, and we'll see you next time.